Good morning. Welcome to Sunday service. My name is Nayaswamis Sadhana Devi. This is Nayaswami Jaya. We're here today from Ananda village in California and India. It's always hard to remember just which place, but anyway, both places. The last time I was here, I was sitting in the airport on my way to India, stranded by my flight being canceled, and to my great appreciation, the Sacramento people came and took care of me, and I had a place to stay overnight, and went and a ride back to the airport the next day, and all of that stuff. Thank you. It saved a lot of time, a lot of time. Well, today's reading, of course, for the first of the year is all about what we do, how we succeed, how we can move forward in our lives in a positive way. And of course, traditionally people make lots of resolutions and all of those kinds of things. But very often, many people are able to make a change in their lives. Something different. And it's not so terribly important what we do. What's really important is that we change something, energy moved in a different direction maybe than the way it was going. We did something different, and that raised our inner energy as a result. Like I say, it doesn't really matter what it was. Very often when I'm preparing for a Sunday service or a class or whatever, I end up cleaning the house first. Well, why? Because once I get rid of the clutter in there, my mind, my brain starts to feel a little more uncluttered, and I can focus a bit better, and I got some energy, physical energy moving around, and I can concentrate better. All of these things are helpful, but what does cleaning house have to do with, whatever it is you're going to speak about in your class? Not a lot. But it works. It works for me, at least. And people do all sorts of things like that to prepare for doing something that requires concentration. And it works quite well. Well, we do things. We want to begin to, as devotees, we want to be able to make improvements in our practice in some fashion or another. We want to do something new, perhaps. One of the things that I would recommend that we try, a suggestion, shall I say, begin to think more and more in terms of communing with Om. Sri Yukteswar said, man's highest duty is to commune with Om. This is a wonderful, wonderful way to to reach oneness. This is a wonderful way to move in that direction where we know we want to go, but we very often are really confused and we don't know how. I had an experience while I was still living in India, and I had a friend there who was telling me, he was kind of new on the path, and he was telling me how he was trying to think of develop devotion to Divine Mother. And he was not having much luck at this. He said, I can't relate to Virgin Mary, even though I was brought up Christian, and here I'm an Indian man, and I live in a Hindu sort of environment. And I said, oh, how about Lakshmi or somebody? He said, oh, too many arms. I said, oh, but she needs a lot of arms to embrace all her children. Oh, that still wasn't enough. So we went on with that, and then someone had suggested to him Ananda Mohima, somebody contemporary, someone that she only died in the 80s, and that didn't do it either. Finally, I had an idea, and I was rather pleased with myself at what I thought of. I said, what about Mother Nature? Because I think your problem is that what you're doing is you're looking at a form. This form, that form, that form. And what we're really trying to do is learn how to go beyond the form. And he wasn't getting anywhere with that. So that's what I suggested. How about Mother Nature? And we know that beyond creation is the formless. And this is really what we're talking about. nature particularly shows us that there is energy, there's plenty of energy, the power of God that creates what we see, what we experience, what we do, however it is. And if you go out into nature, whether it's the forest or the ocean or whatever it is, which reminded me to sing that particular chant today, we do this. We experience nature in some fashion, and it's the energy, really, of nature that uplifts us, really more so than the beauty. We go to the ocean, and what is it? The ocean looks beautiful, of course, but oceans are oceans. They're just a lot of blue. And they somehow, there's something else that reaches us about the ocean, and that's the power of God. That formless power that really, what is energy is, we don't usually think of it as form, but it's what manifests nature, what manifests God in a certain form, in this particular way. So I suggested that to him, and I never did actually follow up and ask him how he did. But this is what we want to remember, is that we're looking to go through the forms that we see, that we love, that guide us with the guru, whatever forms that we love and are guided by. We want to look even beyond that form that we see all the time. And we can do that by learning to commune with Om, because really that's about as close as you can get to the actual essence of all of these things. If you can sit and listen to Om, the more you practice the Om technique, or practice just sitting, just listen and listen, you'll realize that everything that you're enjoying is sort of solidified Om. And we will enjoy that much more deeply by the practice of this, when we commune with God in the form of Om. So I would suggest that to you. This is a new thing to do for a year, for the new year. So I would suggest that if you don't already do this, try this. Try to always be sure at the end of your meditation that you leave time to do something like this, to experience God in one of the 8 ways that we talk about in our classes. Some way that we can experience Om or one of these other qualities of God that we know about. Try to always leave yourself some time for this. And if you can, try to then visualize yourself, your body, as dissolving slowly into that sound of Om. You'll find your meditations are getting longer and longer because they're more and more enjoyable. So thank you.
Welcome everybody to this Sunday service on this special day. And of course, why is it a special day? It's the first day of the year. The first of the year doesn't always fall on a Sunday, so I think it's a special, particularly special this year. We're actually, those of us who participate and follow these teachings of self-realization, we're blessed in a special way because this time of year, which is a very holy season, is particularly good in our tradition because we get 3 holidays to celebrate. There's the traditional, of course, Christmas holiday and the New Year's holiday, but also in a few days on 5th of January, we also get to celebrate Master's birthday, which is coming up. So we have these 3. We start with a very spiritual holiday of Christmas, and the birth of Christ, the awakening of that Christ consciousness, that it symbolizes that Christ consciousness that's within each of us, the outward birth of Christ representing that. And so it's a very spiritual beginning. And of course we end with the 5th of January celebrating our Guru's birthday. and that also is a very joyous occasion. And in between, you have this third holiday. And when people think about January 1st, what do they think about? Well, when I was a child, I used to think January 1st, Rose Parade, or January 1st, the football game, or January 1st, something in that, New Year's Eve, these types of outward things. And it seems in people's minds, and it certainly was in my mind growing up as a child, it was a secular day. It was a secular holiday. And as I've grown up, I see that secular holiday preceded by a very spiritual holy day of Christmas the week before. And then as I came onto this path of self-realization, followed shortly, almost a week, a little less than a week later, by another very special day of Master's birthday. But I've come to feel and understand that actually New Year's is also a spiritual day. It has spiritual importance, and it's something that we should pay attention to, because there's a special energy that, looked at, we can see is important spiritually for us to look at New Year's in this light. Now, in ancient times, of course, in modern times, we don't celebrate it as a spiritual day. We don't go to church except if it's falling on Sunday, perhaps. We don't normally do spiritual services for it. But that hasn't always been the case, of course. In ancient times, it was recognized as a spiritual day, the beginning of the year, January 1st. January itself is named after a Roman god, Janus. And Janus was the god, he was a very important god. He was the god of new beginning. He was beginnings, endings, transitions. And it was a very significant, you could say, there was given that energy of new beginnings, of endings, of times of change, that spirit of that consciousness, those special times in life when things are changing, things are starting new. It was recognized in the old ancient times that that was a special time. That was the time to give special energy to something, and to recognize that, and to pause a moment. And so in the old pagan days and the Roman days, they did that by giving it a god, special recognition. Well, that, of course, tradition has passed on, and we don't remember that. But nevertheless, it's important to remember that this is a time of change and a time of new beginnings. And yet, I say we've forgotten those old traditions, but really I don't think we have. It's just taken perhaps a little bit different form. What do we do traditionally on New Year's? It's a tradition, you say a cultural tradition. It's you might say things that we do and end up undoing very quickly after. We make a New Year's resolution, isn't that so? Because we recognize that there's something new, and we're starting fresh. Now, in the Roman days, God Janus is one. If you ever see, you can see a representation of him. If you ever do, you'll notice he's very peculiar because he's represented by two faces. He has a face on this side and he has a face on that side. That's Janus. Well, that's representative because he had one face was looking back and one face was looking to the future. And that's a sense what we do as well. When it comes time for New Year's, we look back and we say, what happened? What did I accomplish in this year that passed? And sometimes I recommend, look back, reminisce, not with regret or with judgment or with the sense of, oh my God, I'd rather forget it all. Just look back in the spirit of learning the lesson. What did I learn? What was significant to me in this past year? And then taking that, then the other face of looking forward into the future. What's in the future? What does it hold for me? Where am I going? What have I learned from the past that now I can take forward into the future? The autobiography of a yogi express this Sri Yukteswar in a very good way. I think it's the most powerful statement in that whole book. Sri Yukteswar said, "The past lives of all men are dark with many shames, but everything in future will improve if we make the right spiritual effort now." So consequently, yes, we look back and we remember those things, but not, we put them aside, we learn the lesson, we extract what is useful from it, and then we go forward. Now, Christmas has a special vibration of inspiration. The birth of Christ, that symbolism of what that represents, not the person, but that consciousness, that represents something that's very inspirational. But then we come to New Year's, and what is that? Well, inspiration needs to be put into action. Is that inspiration going to change our lives for the better? Which we hope, of course, it will. If we're inspired, it's not enough to leave it at that. We want to take that inspiration and we now want to translate it into doing something. I'm inspired enough to take this step or that action. And so in that sense, New Year's is an important day because I'm going to take my ideals, my inspiration, those things that I feel in my heart that have been awakened, or on a deeper level, that light of higher consciousness that has been awakened within me, I'm now going to put it into effect in my daily life, and I'm going to cultivate that. And then, of course, you could even bring Master's birthday into that by saying, I'll cultivate it with Master as my guide. Hand in hand, with his help and blessings and guidance, I'm going to go forward into the new year. So you could say that New Year's is important in this regard, is that it actualizes those things that we feel very deeply about in ourselves and helps us to put them into motion and change ourselves. And so we have, and I think this is recognized, perhaps not consciously, but I think all of us, that spirit of change, that spirit of new beginnings is a universal feeling. Everybody, it's like the morning, you feel, it's a new day, I'm going to go forward. Now it's a new year, you're going to go forward. And so you resolved, I'm leaving the past behind, now I'm going to start again. As many times as perhaps I've stumbled and failed in the past, I'm going to try again. And so we make these resolutions. Now, of course, maybe those resolutions, you join the health club, or you're going to go on a new diet, or you're going to, or whatever, or let's take it into the realm perhaps a little bit more meaningful for us. I'm going to get up every day at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock or 4:30 or whatever it might be for you. I'm going to meditate every day. Or I'm going to do those 108 kriyas like is recommended. And you could take it on that level, and we initiate it and we start. Now, I read a very interesting article about New Year's. I'm sure maybe some of you have read this in the past as well. It's true. It's true. Most people, they start their resolutions, and most people are not able to hang on, and they backslide a little bit. That's true, but it's somewhat overblown, actually, that there is a surprisingly large number of people that actually are quite successful at it. But I'll come to that in a moment. But one of the things that has been discovered by researchers, sociologists or psychologists, and following this up, is that people who are successful in their resolutions are those people who made a very conscious resolution and said, I resolve and make this a resolution. It's like making a vow to oneself. You resolve, I'm going to lose that 5 pounds, or whatever it might be. When you make a resolve, a vow-like resolve that I am going to do it, it's much, some say up to 10 times more effective chance of success than a person who just makes a vague intentional statement. To make that, in other words, to engage the will. I will. This is important, and to make that, you're much more likely to be successful. Now, another interesting fact that related to that, and it was a study had been done of a large number of people who made their resolutions, and they found that although it's true, most people, majority didn't stick with it. But surprisingly, they found that 39% of people in their 20s were successful. They stuck to their resolution and made a positive change in their life, or whatever that resolution was. 39%, that's quite high. But that's the good news. The bad news was that only 14% of people over 50 were able to be successful. Now, why is that? Now, I don't know the answer of why, and unfortunately, this study didn't go into that. But I suspect that there's a certain thought comes into people's minds as they get older. When you're youthful, I can do anything. And with that attitude, you can. Actually, you can do more things. But perhaps with a little bit of age, we said, oh, you know, I've done that before and I didn't work. I said it so many times. I mean, it's not going to work. And there's a little bit of that in the back of one's mind. Well, you've somewhat doomed yourself a little bit. Perhaps as you get older, your willpower gets a little weaker. I ask you to think about it. I haven't thought it through to know why all the answers are there. But it seemed to be a fact, is that perhaps I think people, is that first, that I failed in the past, and that thought begins to linger with us, because yes, I know how resolutions go, and we don't give it quite as much energy, because perhaps so many times I failed, it's okay, and we let it go, whatever it might be. But remember, don't ever say that you failed. You never failed. Remember what Swami would say? Say, if those of you remember what Swami Ananda, when it would come to that, and he would always use his smoking analogy when he, as a college student, he smoked and he resolved to change and he always backslid. But he said he'd never said he failed. He said, I just haven't succeeded yet. And always pick it up from that string. Pick it up from that string, and you find that little by little, that you begin to find that you actually do succeed. Now, the one thing that was noticed, perhaps most importantly, and I think of the principles of making New Year's resolutions, which I do think it's a good time to do it. It's a positive trait to make that affirmation because it's in the air. And I say that figuratively, but there is a certain energy, a wave of energy, that if we catch the wave, and this is a time of year when we can catch that wave, when we can use that energy to a new beginning to start, and we can make that resolution. Now, one of perhaps the strongest reason many people have succeeded when they make a resolution is this. When we think of a resolution, we think, boy, that takes a lot of willpower. And that's perhaps what weakens. But they found that the people who are most successful succeeding at their resolutions are those who use their willpower the least. Now, what do I mean by that? You can actually, I remember reading this article, and the fellow who wrote this said, willpower is overrated. Now, I don't agree with that statement, but the point he was making was, in the studies that they did of people who were successful, he says those people who had the strongest will and succeeded in their resolutions were those who used their will least, in the sense that they arranged their environment in such a way so that they did not have to use their will all the time. Because they found that if you have to use your willpower again and again and again to overcome something, eventually it degrades. But if you can conserve that will to use it at times when it's necessary, but instead arrange your environment in a way that you don't have to use that will all the time. And of course, the example here is if you're an alcoholic or inclined that way, you don't put wine and gin on your altar and just admire it, and then tell yourself, well, look how strong it's making my will to have it right there, so that I'm resisting it all the time. So you're continually using your will, thinking you're going to make your will strong. It doesn't work that way. But what you're doing is that those bottles have power, and it's slowly sucking that will from you. Is what you do is you arrange your life to cooperate with what you want to achieve. Now, those of us who meditate regularly, we practice these teachings of meditation, Kriya Yoga, we can take this to heart. Arrange your life. Perhaps you want to get up in the morning regularly. I think of that old invention that one fellow invented, the clock would go off and his bed would go up and pop him out of bed at the right hour. So that's cleverly arranging your environment. Well, in the same way, we can if we want to get up at a certain time, arrange our life to support that. Arrange your life, your habits.
I found your notes.
Hey, I wrote, how did you find that?
They were in the bathroom. I didn't realize they were yours.
I wrote that quote down, and I was just thinking, I put it in my pocket somewhere yesterday, and I said, gee, if I'd only brought that quote, I would have read it. That's amazing. Anyway, it was in my pocket somewhere, and it fell out.
Wash your hands or something.
When I was changing.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to pause. This is about that. He said the study led by Wilhelm Hoffman of the University of Chicago showed that the people with the best self-control, paradoxically, are the ones who use their willpower less often. Instead of fending off one urge after another, these people set up their lives to minimize temptations. They play offense, not defense, using their willpower in advance so they avoid crises, conserve their energy, and outsource as much self-control as they can. I like that, outsource their self-control. Now, but this is the, you might say, the wise approach. And I think for the devotee, for the meditator, it's the wise way to don't tempt yourself. Arrange your environment. Arrange your situation. You could say that, as Master would often say, environment is stronger than willpower. This was a principle that he would say again and again. So the wise devotee arranges environment to support his willpower, not to test it, you see. And then you find that little by little, the willpower used judiciously begins to grow and not is degraded. And then you can take on bigger and bigger challenges. And this is how we should use it. These are principles to make that resolution to be successful in our spiritual life. And then I'd like to bring in finally a fourth element is using your will in a way that's in harmony with your divine aspirations, with what you really want in life, and also bringing in the power of the divine into your use of your will. And I think this is where Master's birthday, celebrated on January 5th, comes into play, is we struggle with our resolutions, but don't feel that we must fight this battle alone. This is if we bring the large larger presence of God's power into our life, Master's blessings into our life, and try to bring the Guru in to your spiritual life. Of course, we do that naturally, but also try to find ways to bring it in to help you in your mundane day-to-day affairs, the little things that we also try to accomplish. And if in this way, this holiday season of the awakening of that divine presence at Christmas, keeping it alive through action outwardly expressed in some positive way, that's the New Year's, and then directing that inspiration, guiding that inspiration, letting it be in tune with divine will, and particularly with Guru's will. That's the celebration of Master's birthday, which you'll participate in on Thursday, 5th of January. Many blessings to you. I'd like to now invite us to take our offering, and